Hello, we're doing a bucket hat look today because I'm having a bad hair day and I'm going to make that everyone's problem. So, back in 2022, when the film Everything Everywhere All at Once came out, a YouTuber who I really like, named Cosmonaut Marcus, dropped this 5-star letterboxd review in which he said, quote, "Watch it and have fun before film Twitter tells you it's overrated." And I feel like this has been like a predictive text of the modern day internet age, because this discourse did in fact happen later on with Everything Everywhere All at Once, and it's currently happening with one of the most talked about films of this year, The Substance. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. First, I'm going to give my breakdown and recap of The Substance. I'll talk about what it's about, I'll talk about some of the themes present in it and my interpretation of those themes and the execution in general, and then from there we're going to talk about some criticisms that I've been seeing online recently of the film and its director. The Substance is a satirical body horror film directed by Coralie Fargeat and starring Demi and Margaret Qualley. I was hesitant about seeing this one because I'm actually not a huge horror movie fan. I have severe anxiety about death, and horror movies tend to trigger that for me, so I tend to avoid them. But I saw the rave reviews, and outside of all the gross stuff, the themes that people were discussing were all things that I was really interested in seeing in a film, and so my boyfriend and I went to see it, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. This is the part where I'd say the premise is simple, but it isn't. And for now, I'm going to avoid spoilers. I'll give a spoiler warning in a bit, but basically the film follows an actress and fitness tape star Elisabeth Sparkle, played by Demi, and what happens when the zeitgeist doesn't want her anymore. Fed up with feeling invisible as an older woman who feels increasingly irrelevant, she takes a mysterious drug that allows her to create a younger version of herself, Sue, played by Margaret Qualley. The two of them are different people, but one consciousness, kind of. There's rules they have to follow to keep both of them alive and stable, and they must switch every week to maintain that balance, and you can probably tell that things don't go as planned. Everything about this is so bizarre, and I feel like on paper it shouldn't work, but it totally does. The timeline in which this takes place is kind of indistinguishable, but it doesn't really matter. Obviously it's LA, but LA is not the point of the commentary here. Dennis Quaid's character is an entertainment mogul asshole type, but you don't need his ham-fisted modern Americanized references to all of the things that he's produced to get that vibe. The big finale event is the New Year show with no references to a network, and there's naked dancers on stage. It's all very French. The late night talk show that Sue appears on looks fake in a way. Sue instantly becomes a big star because she's on an exercise show. She doesn't even have any social media or a last name. It's all ridiculous, but it almost works because the film is presented sort of like a modern alternate universe fairy tale. But the things that are specific work exactly the way they need to. The marketing and the aesthetic of The Substance is perfect in what it needs to communicate about this highly sought after magic fountain of youth and a connection to modern day desirability. When Sue is doing her pump up show, she looks like she was plucked right out of Euphoria, this highly stylized, unmistakable Gen Z vibe. So much of this movie is ridiculous and implausible and over the top, but the things that are done with intentionality really do matter. And unfortunately, this is where I'm going to have to stop the train so those who haven't gotten the opportunity to see the film can hop off. We will be talking spoilers for the remainder of this video. So as I alluded to, Elisabeth and Sue end up abusing the balance in more ways than one. The more Elisabeth sees how Sue is revered and adored in society, the more she feels insecure about herself. This causes Elisabeth to resent Sue to the point where she starts abusing alcohol and overeating to deliberately cause Sue physical harm when they switch. Additionally, there's a scene where Elisabeth decides to try and seek some validation from an old friend of hers and sets up time for a date. This is a scene that you may have seen on social media, but it's a really poignant moment in the film, beautifully acted by Demi, where she picks apart her own imperfections in the mirror, literally haunted by a billboard of Sue outside her window. She ends up tearing away at her face and her makeup, only to decide not to go out at all. It's the most human moment in the movie, because it's a moment that all women have experienced. Trying to appear a certain way and making yourself believe that's how you feel when it seems like other, better, more put-together versions of you are literally right outside your door. Because of the psychological toll all of this takes on Elisabeth, it becomes harder to respect the rules of the switch, because living as Sue is so much easier in every way. And so Sue essentially extracts more and more life from Elisabeth's body, which makes Elisabeth age rapidly. It gets to the point where Sue runs out of the materials needed to keep both of them alive and functioning, and Elisabeth, now old and haggard, makes the choice to kill Sue, just before Sue's big chance to host the New Year's Eve show. Only she can't go through with it, and Sue suddenly wakes up. Enraged, she kills Elisabeth, but that causes Sue to rapidly destabilize. Now, this is where a lot of the crazy body horror elements you may have heard about come in. Sue, in a panic, injects the substance one more time, which is supposed to be single-use only. This makes way for Monstro Elisasue, a Cronenberg-like horrifying fleshy monster comprised of both bodies. This is where things fly off the handle into total over-the-top fantasy because Elisasue manages to get back to the New Year's Eve show, sneaking on stage by wearing a paper cutout of Elisabeth's old face. Then the monster is revealed, the crowd gasps in horror, Dennis Quaid tries to kill it and it regenerates and covers the audience in blood. At the end, the monster escapes and remnants of its body end up on Elisabeth's old Hollywood Walk of Fame star. Her old face appears, she smiles, and the goo is swept away the next morning. All of it is ridiculous, none of it is subtle, and that's what I love about it, because as soon as it was over, I turned to Brian and said, "Yep, that's what it feels like to be a girl." Of course, the body horror is immaculately done. This whole third act is some of the grossest shit I've ever seen in a movie, but I respect the fact that this director just goes for it. It's visceral, it's violent, Sue and Elisabeth hate each other until the minute they meet their demise, and it's a feeling that's really uncomfortable to sit with after it's all said and done. Now, there are a couple nitpicks I have with this movie, mainly in the pacing because it is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I think there's one scene in particular I would have cut out where Elisabeth meets another substance user. It just didn't add much to the overall plot for me. And like, if you're a person who is bothered by minor plot contrivances, you're not gonna like this movie because there's literally an entire scene where Sue builds a hidden layer in the bathroom and it's just absurd. But if you can't already tell, I really like this movie. It's a movie that has stuck with me since I saw it a few weeks ago, and I think part of that is, the cultural conversation around it has been really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's a horror movie with some really fun iconography, and therefore it has more cultural staying power. I already mentioned the fact that Margaret Qualley looks like she, popped out of Euphoria. And most of this is, timing and luck, but the fact that the substance is brat green, a color that has been making its rounds in a lot of different meme formats this year. The fact that the bonkers kind of plot is generating so many different meme formats in and of itself. The fact that the substance injections can literally be compared to what's going on with the Ozempic craze right now. It's a perfect movie for this time, and it's crazy that it happens to be a gruesome body horror film distributed by Mubi by a French director that involves a Cronenberg monster puking up a boob. Okay, criticism number 1. The substance is actually misogynistic. Now, this argument has come from a bunch of different places since the substance first released. Some of it, I think, has been a little bit ironic, some of it has been a bit half-baked, but the most coherent argument that I've been able to glean from people who have this take and are not acting in bad faith is that the film tackles issues like vanity and the patriarchy and the problem with societal beauty standards through the lens of an unsympathetic protagonist. The main things we know about Elisabeth are that she is vain, she's a little bit bitter about her place in the world as an older woman in the entertainment industry, and she'll do anything to seek that same feeling of fame and love and adoration from her fans that she hasn't gotten in many years due to her age. We're not really shown anything about Elisabeth's upbringing, or her social life, her family life, her friendships. We're only shown this character as she exists in the relationship to her own vanity. And so therefore, how can you sympathize with a character who is so obsessed with chasing these unrealistic, unobtainable beauty standards without unpacking, the trauma of her girlhood and why women feel the need to conform to these societal pressures outside of, I want to be young and hot. And so furthermore, the argument is that the ending of the film is mocking Elisabeth and Sue in terms of the wow, they got what they deserve moment. And I personally didn't read specifically the ending that way at all. I read the ending as Elisabeth finally achieving happiness because she's free from the prison that is her own body. And at the very least, I can see sort of the through line of this take, it's coherent and it makes sense to me. I just think people wanted this to be a different movie, if that makes sense. Like, to me, the point of this movie was just, like, a very intimate deconstruction of, like, women's self-hatred. Like, that was the point, and in order to zero in on this in the way that they do, they kind of forego, like, any aspects of realism that could theoretically benefit Elisabeth's character in any other film. But the stuff that I find most interesting in this film is all of the metaphor going on between Elisabeth and Sue as characters, and what it's like to hold contempt for a younger version of yourself, while society constantly broadcasts to you that your current self is flawed and needs to be fixed. I feel like most times that I see a piece of media try to tackle this concept, it always ends up coming off a little bit like after school specially. I think the fact that the filmmaker chooses to focus so deeply and laser in on this relationship is what makes it work, you know? Like, I don't really care that I didn't see Elisabeth, like, getting made fun of on the playground when she was younger, or throwing up in a toilet after a director calls her fat when she's in her 20s. Like, I didn't need any of that to be sympathetic to her. I think the mirror scene that Demi Moore performs is enough to make me understand what she's going through. Criticism number 2. The substance is not subtle. Here's me trying to give even a little bit of a fuck. Now, if you can't already tell, this take, unlike the previous one that we've discussed, makes me a little bit more mad, because it's like, sure, yeah, nothing about the themes of this movie are that subtle, but that doesn't mean that the movie isn't interesting regardless. Like, in no way are these themes new to cinema, you know what I mean? They've been explored hundreds of different times before. Relatively speaking, this is a new and interesting way of presenting this type of cautionary fairy tale type story. Like, yeah, there are times when lack of subtlety can be a critique. But with a film like this, everything is presented to be so clearly in excess right from the jump. It's very clearly supposed to be like a stylistic decision that the filmmaker is doing here. I just don't understand how you can critique it that way. If you don't like it, I guess that's fine. But to imply that the film would be better if it was more subtle, like, I don't see how that is an argument that can be made. Then it would just be a different movie entirely. I don't think a good film is defined by whether or not it is consistently outsmarting the audience. Like, this film is not good to me because I instantly understood its themes. It's such a weird critique to me. Like, I don't think every piece of media has to be, like, deceiving me along the way. In fact, I think a lot of TV writers often fall into this trap where they feel as though they need to be doing that, and it makes the work subpar overall. Don't get me wrong, I love a tight, cleverly written, subtle script every now and again, but if you present me a product where the themes are kind of beating you over the head the whole time, but it's interesting and it's engaging and compelling, I don't give a fuck. I don't care. Okay, so now let's talk about how we approach criticism on the internet, what constitutes as valid versus invalid criticism, and why this discourse ramps up every time a film that seemingly gets rave reviews in theaters transfers to some sort of video on demand or streaming option, or sometimes gets leaked on TikTok in a dub that is usually Portuguese. Okay, so I don't think it's the end of the world when people have differing opinions on movies. Art is subjective, and taste in art is subjective. We're all individual humans perceiving different facets of the human experience, and so it's not possible for all of us to, like, have the same takeaways about the same things. The criticisms that I've seen of the substance that I've explained here are not takes that I agree with, and I've explained why I personally disagree with them. And I don't necessarily think that a person is problematic for saying that the substance is misogynistic or that it lacks subtlety to be enjoyable. The people with those takes just have different preferences than me. However, what I can't stand is the notion that we have to deem other people as problematic if we enjoy something that they don't enjoy, and vice versa. Just cutting in here because listening back to this, I know people are going to, like, misinterpret what I'm saying based on what I said in my Joker review, if you watch that video. Because in that review, I did say that liking Todd Phillips' Joker a little too much is a bit of a red flag, but what I meant by that was the fanfare around that movie got co-opted by some right-wing grifters who praised Arthur Fleck the character as if his ideology was coherent and something to agree with. Which is very different from, you know, the base concept of liking Joker makes you problematic. I don't agree with that. I just wanted to clear that up because sometimes, you know, things get misinterpreted on the internet. We know this. Finding the substance misogynistic is not a cancelable offense. Just like me being a substance enjoyer does not mean that I am a sheep that likes dumb movies. People tend to deal in extremes like this because it gives them a grander sense of self-importance online. Because I didn't like the substance does not have the same ring to it as I didn't like the substance, and if you do like it, then you're a stupid clown who likes to be pandered to with stupid, nonsense, campy fairy tale movies. Oh, and you hate women. Doesn't matter if you are a woman. Doesn't matter if you're a woman who derived a sense of relatability and important meaning from watching this film. Doesn't matter, you fucking hate women. And just like Everything Everywhere All at Once, you're going to be seeing more of these takes the more that the film becomes accessible, like outside of theaters and on streaming and whatnot. 2 years from now, you're gonna see a tweet from a canceled podcaster. It's usually going to be at the end of the month because they're trying to like get, engagement bait to get paid by Elon. And it's gonna say like, enough time has passed. Can we talk about how the substance is actually mid? And then this cycle repeats itself until we all die. In conclusion, I really enjoyed this movie, and not to get like, vulnerable on the internet TM, but I am a person who has struggled with body image and body dysmorphia, and watching this movie, as weird and wild as it was, like, made me feel seen, and I think it resonated in that way for a lot of other women, and I just don't, sit right with the fact that, like, that is being co-opted by people who are just trying to do outrage bait about how, like, popular thing is overrated, and I think that, like, if you dislike the movie, that's fine, you have your reasons why, but, like, you're not a bad person for liking it. You're not a bad person for disliking it. We should all just try to respect each other's opinions a little bit more. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Let me know what your favorite movie is that you have seen this year. Mine is still Dune 2. I am still Dune-pilled. I don't know when it's gonna stop. I feel like the Club Chalamet lady. But she's on the right side of history, I think. So let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.